as well. All right, cool. So today's agenda will start with usual business, and then we'll jump back into our walkthroughs of the AU patient summary profiles. Today, Andrew will be taking us through medication requests, medication statement, and related person, time permitted for those. The last session, we reviewed profiles like patient, immunization, and condition. These are now reflected in the IG differential view. Today, we'll focus on medications and related person. If we don't, we'll roll related person into the next session if we don't get to it. So the agenda is flexible depending on how the discussion goes. There are 18 profiles in total, and we're aiming to review all of them over the coming 3 weeks, I think. So these walkthroughs are also a transition to the implementation guide. We'll transition to a combined all-in-one after they're reviewed they're an all-in-one view, and then they'll go into a derived view for AU Core for a differential view as the profiles are finalized after the walkthroughs and feedback. So after we do the walkthroughs, we'll hear from Shelley and Steve on some use case design decisions, which will directly tie into our ballot for comment scope, and then we'll wrap up with the next steps and upcoming meetings. So a quick reminder of what we're working towards, which is the ballot for comment version of the PS implementation guide. So we've started reviewing the scope, and now we're stepping through each profile that makes up the Australian patient summary. These need to align to both IPS and AU Core, and as we'll go, we'll ask questions like what is missing, what is hard to implement, what feedback should we send back to the IPS and AU Core groups, and where do we want to take this next? And use case content is also evolving with each call, shaped by input. And this is your opportunity to shape what goes into ballot to confirm alignment, identify issues, and provide feedback. So on this slide, this is the visual of what we've been using each week and shows what our progress is. So you'll see the items we've already covered here in blue. And the one we're focused on today is in bold. I'll bring this up today and at the end of the meeting. It helps give people an orientation of where we're up to. So this timeline leads to the ballot for comment, the 11th of August to 7th of September. And in the lead up to June, we'll have profile walkthroughs, use case elaboration. Then late June shifts to things like use case feedback, reconciliation, AFMM and AUCDI mapping confirmation, AU variance confirmation. And there's also a Spark testing event on the 24th of June, which will be a major checkpoint for the AUPS. And in late July, August, there's a focus on conformance requirements, security and privacy. Then on the 9th of August, we target to publish the ballot for comment snapshot. So I'd like to note that the earlier we surface issues, especially those affecting AU Core and IPS, the better. So heading to the ballot for working standard in August, it's our opportunity to influence changes is limited. So it's important we raise issues as promptly as possible so we can feed it back to those groups. So stepping into usual business. So we'll go through the usual business and we'll start with the approval of the minutes. So what I might do is I might pull up the minutes from the last meeting and see so what we have in our minutes, we have all the attendees, we have the YouTube recording, the slides, the transcript, and I haven't heard of any outstanding feedback. I guess my question is, does anyone need any more time to review the minutes before we go to an approval? I think all the documented decisions are in here as well, and everything we walked through in the previous meeting. All right, not hearing any objections. Would someone like to entertain a motion to approve these minutes? And
I'm happy to do that, Marvin.
Thank you very much, Marvin. I'll look to launch an electronic poll. So feel free to enter your vote.
Lyndon,
Yes.
I'm happy to second, Shelley.
Oh, thank you very much, Shelley. Shelley, a second. So I'll launch the poll. Feel free to pop your vote in the chat if you're able to vote on the poll, or feel free to just call out your name and whether it is affirmative, negative, or abstain. I'll try to launch the poll now. Great. Feel free to enter your vote. All right, we have 76 participants. We'll give this a few more moments, then I'll count down. All right, we're over 80%. So I'll do a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then I'll end the poll now. So did we have anything in? We have 1 abstain for Brett. So that brings, so for the affirmative then, we have 8. For negative, we have 0. And with the abstain, we have +1 with Brett, so 7. I'll share the results. Great. I'll go back to the slides. So from the previous meetings, we had some actions with Steve and Chu. He was going to raise some issues with AU Base and the AU Core co-chairs around gender, and I think relaxing the cardinality in that. Do we have a Steve online to find out any updates from these actions?
Well, he did raise it, so it's something that we've got to take into consideration. We'll probably chat about it at our next. It's on the agenda for the next AU Core meeting.
Oh, okay, great. That's a good update. So we'll postpone any actions here then. So thank you. We'll swing back to that then. And updates and news then, we'll move to that. So Conformance Fridays, conformance sessions, I think are now at 11 a.m. on Fridays, and we have slide and presentations now on Confluence. And I might show this. We have the recordings, transcripts, and notes and ongoing compliance discussions. So I'll show this. I found this the other day, and I think this is it. And Heath can confirm. But here are the slides of the previous conformance sessions, the YouTube, the PDF slides, the transcripts, and upcoming meetings here as well. I think this was recently created. And I think the last thing then was just an FYI, yesterday's TDG for AU Core. There was a normative change around patient identifier, with Medicare identifier now having a cardinality of 0 to many. And I believe this change will be brought into the patient summary. So it's just a notification of a normative vote from yesterday, which will be flowing through. Great, now we're on to the profile walkthroughs. And I think Andrew was going to take us through those profiles today. Would you like to share your screen, Andrew, or are you happy for to share my screen?
Yeah, why don't you keep it with your screen for now? There's a couple boilerplate things to walk through, and then
Sure.
once we jump into the actual IGs. So first, just a reminder for today, we're going to be covering the medication statement, medication request, and related person. For these sessions, for the next patient summary sessions, review these profiles ahead of time, bring the questions you have on them, things that don't make sense, things that are challenging for your implementations in Australia. If you have changes ahead of time, you can create JIRA tickets to submit those issues beforehand. Otherwise, you can attend and bring up those issues for discussion. Next slide. So in terms of walkthroughs, today we're focusing on numbers 5 through 8. These walkthroughs are scheduled for the months of May through July, so future ones will focus on the 9 through 15 ones. And we have already covered the patient summary, patient immunization condition. If you look at the implementation guides, the build implementation guides, some of the accepted changes from patient have already been folded in and published, so you'll see those in the continuous integration version. Next slide, please. So to recap what our design principles are and to kind of remind everyone as we go into discussing these profiles, our main design principles are that the AU patient summary shall validate against both IPS and AU core profiles when both are available. That includes things like those upstream implementation guides, cardinality, must support fixed patterns, data types, etc. It shall also validate against reference elements against the AU patient summary profile. And finally, AU core profile value sets are preferred over IPS value sets when defined. Required bindings are intersections of both value sets. Other bindings will use the AU core value set and binding strength. And the reason we want to re-highlight these design principles is it helps us identify what types of things are on the table for us to change versus what are things that we need to identify in the upstream profiles and submit feedback or changes for things like IPS or AU core. Typically, we can agree to add to AU patient summary on top of what is AU core and inherited from AU core and IPS. But if there are changes that need to be brought back upstream, ideally we'll identify what those pieces of feedback are, and then members of this group can take those to the relevant IPS or AU core profile place to submit that feedback. All right, next slide, please. So this is just additionally a recap of the current authoring approach. With these, what we've done is loaded the AU base that AU core inherits and the IPS into the preview environment. What this allows us to do is use that view to see everything, as we'll show shortly, and see those diffs highlighted in one place for easy human readable review. And then eventually we'll move away from those and switch it over to AU core, and those diffs will be very tight of just what's added in AU patient summary. All right, any questions for that initial recap of those design principles, the draft profiles, or plan for the next fortnights? All right. Landon, if you could do the next slide. So first up is the AU patient summary medication profile. I will share my screen really quick. So on this slide so far are some of the core, yeah, I'll share mine. Okay, you can all see that? All right. So as we look at this profile, some of the elements and additional requirements that are folded in from patient summary relate to the sub-elements of the codable concept that are inherited from the IPS codable concept and flagged as must support, specifically the code and the text elements. So that applies for the code, form, and some of the ingredient items. Those are some things that are flagged initially, and as we jump over to the actual thing, we can take a look at the differential table. So part of the differential is the codable concepts for IPS in these forms that effectively just says you need a code and a textual value. So form, ingredient, code, etc. The one other major difference between the IPS and the AU core is these slices for coding. Right now, we are inheriting these slices with AMT and PBS, which are not necessarily code sets in, which are not code sets in the IPS realm. So the IPS prefers a preferred binding of SNOMED CT medications, while the preferred bindings we inherit, or the slices we inherit from core, are PBS and AMT. Those are the primary differences between AU patient summary medication and the IPS. Are there any questions on these differences so far? Okay. For anyone who has implemented the AU patients or is implementing the patient summary medication, are there challenges or issues that you have faced with this?
I think the one thing I'll call out is that there are currently discussions in BASE around that would relate to ingredient strength. We're talking about, and the original discussion was expanding the ingredient strength extension, which currently applies at the base level, so that it can apply at the ingredient level. I think the discussion in Zulip has landed on actually backporting the codable concept actually makes more sense for ingredient strength. And so that's something that we'd be looking at potentially bringing in. It just is something different. So that would be backporting from R5, because not all systems can support the ratio data element. I don't think it's incompatible. I think it's just something that's worth calling out for visibility.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem. It's going to be obviously part of the AU core profile, because it will inherit from base. But it's whether it's going to be must support or not is a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be there and available for us to use if we desire. But yeah, I think it'll just trickle through that process.
Yeah.
I think it's
Just
a good
for
point.
visibility.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Just because the strength is must support in IPS, so it may be more important.
But at the same time, it's if known. So if it's not known as a ratio, then we fall back to our extension. And I mean, the same goes for basically the extension that's at the medication resource level as well. That will be available because we inherit from AU-based medication.
Yeah.
But and then we can choose whether it's must support or not.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is a good call out, that strength does have that ratio and that must support we are inheriting currently from IPS, but it sounds like that is being addressed somewhat in AU base. So that is a definite watch point for implementers to be aware of. Another must support we inherit from IPS is the must support on the item level of the excuse me, item level of the ingredient. So that's another kind of watch point as we're reviewing this for the differences and how that applies to a patient summary. Is there any thoughts on the slices or preferred binding for the code, the medication code?
Well, I think we need to be looking at AMT codes. So it's actually a good call out, Andrew, because obviously in AU core, we're not must supporting on ingredient. So we haven't had to address this in the past, but now that we're inheriting from IPS, we probably want to put our own binding on that item.
Our own
Because we've
binding.
got- Yeah, there's a preferred one in AU base, but you would have to think about it.
Well, it might be more than preferred.
Yeah, I think that's
Okay, I didn't realize that because it wasn't showing, but that's just a rendering thing. So yes, we inherit that obviously.
Because, and that would be, whereas
one of our principles, sorry to keep cutting you off, Andrew, one of our principles was that we would adopt the Australian bindings. So we would override that one, which,
I mean, theirs is only preferred as well, so
yeah.
maybe
is there must by because it has a must support, does that override?
No, because it's just preferred. I mean, we're inheriting the must support on the element. So now we have to actually address it. We're inheriting from the binding through a base, but we also need to conform with IPS. But our principles say that we will adopt the Australian bindings over and above IPS bindings. And the fact that it's a preferred in both cases means that we're allowed to do that. And it's whether we want to make it stronger or not.
Yeah, and that value set itself, that's a SNOMED value set for IPS. Yeah, SNOMED CT.
Okay, so this it sounds like there's a question that we can take away as co-chairs of, because there's a preferred binding set in base medication, should that not override the IPS preferred binding set for item?
Well, the way that this has already been, because we're already inheriting from base, like if you go back to the PS profile, we're actually deriving from base, but in theory, we should also conform to IPS, but it's not whether we should. I think the principles are clear what we should be doing. What I'm asking is whether we want it to be stronger than preferred.
Well, if we want the binding in patient summary to, well, so sorry, there's two pieces. One, the item right now.
Maybe go to the key elements.
This is the key
Andrew.
The key elements
this is
for.
Oh, cool. Yep.
The key elements for this do have.
Yeah.
So it inherits the must support for the item, but it is bound. It inherits the must support from IPS, but it is binding preferred to the
AMT.
So.
Yeah, but it's still only preferred.
It's still only preferred. So there's a question of, do we want to make it more than a preferred binding in a patient summary, or should it be or should that binding be raised at a lower level, such as core or base?
But I think medication code is only a preferred bind. We
Yeah,
have
exactly.
slice options. Yeah. Anyway.
Is that?
Yeah, because that's what you got in AU base. The main binding. I mean, you have the slices available. Got a binding at all?
Doesn't look like it, does it?
No. Yeah, because I think we're just giving options. Yeah.
The slices allow us options as opposed to
Are the slices defined at base or in core?
base. Nope.
So that should give us a binding then. It's the binding in base.
So the slices are defined at core. The base binding is preferred.
They're additional bindings. Yeah.
Preferred additional bindings.
But
Yeah.
at the
Our primary
root
binding
level,
is
it's
just
an
an
example.
Yeah. So we just have the additional bindings to say if you do AMT, use this. If you do PBS, use that. Yeah. And then they're in core, they're turned into slices. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Recognizing.
So I don't think we need to make it stronger, is what I'm saying.
Mhm.
For the ingredients. Yeah.
Okay. So with that, I think we can move on to medication request.
Can I just rebuttal on what Brett said? I mean, although it's an IPS version of Medicaid or SNOMED medicine substances, we've probably got an intersection, really. I'd say the Australian value set is probably very similar of substances, is very similar to the IPS substances. So I don't know. I've personally think that even just the fact that we're coming from SNOMED in both cases, it wouldn't hurt for us to strengthen it, because even if someone was actually implementing the IPS one, it's probably going to also comply with our extensible AMT substances one, if you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah. But I would do that in AU core if I cared that much.
But we don't do anything in AE core on ingredient, that's the thing.
Because it's not yeah, okay. Gotcha.
So sorry, these are not our move. Apologies. We're talking about
The item codable concept.
item codable concept.
Which is currently an AMT medicinal product and substances.
Yeah. Which will overlap with the IPS, like Keith said.
Got it. So.
Oh, hang on. That's medicinal product and substances. Can you open up that value set?
Yeah, we add in MP level AMP codes. Yeah. It's both.
Yeah, I still think that my previous statement is still valid then.
Yeah,
we're wider than what
exactly.
IPS is, but not in reverse.
Yeah, not in reverse. Yeah.
Would that have a problem for you guys, Andrew, if we had a wider value set? It's only preferred.
I mean, I'm trying to, and preferred, no. I think the thing I'm trying to think through is from a implementer's perspective, right? If you are just serving up, if your system is limited to serving up what is only in the IPS, and that's covered as an umbrella from this, you should be fine. And if, as with most of our things in terms of ingestion, you're just saying don't fall over if it's, we should be fine there. So,
well, it's more than that now. You now in IPS you have to handle. So
but I don't think we are taking obligations to start for patient summary. So we might not have that level of resolution.
All right, so it's a question that we could probably, I don't know where we deal with it, but it's probably a question that comes out of today, is whether we strengthen the binding or leave it as preferred.
I think that would, I guess, Brett, or not, sorry, Heath, what I would propose is that would be a good discussion for an AU core to start, if it would make sense to do there.
Yep. And I mean, I could even pick it up in the Conformance Friday sessions next week as well.
Any other closing thoughts on medication before we move to medication request? Okay. All right, so medication request. Some of the key things to call out, medication request subject is inheriting a minimum of 1 and is flagged as must support in IPS. So it is, by inheriting from IPS, we are saying that a medication request must have a reference to a patient, and that cardinality is 1. The other one is dosage, instruction, timing. This is flagged as must support in IPS, where that was not flagged in core, as with. And then route. So with route, again, because of the codable concept from IPS, can't find route. That does inherit some of the must supports on the codable concepts. For people who have or are implementing the medication request for patient summary, are there issues or challenges or questions that you've run into that you'd want to review today?
Well, Andrew, I think just the discussion we had on the previous profile, I think route here kind of falls into the same bucket where we don't require it in AU core, but we do have a AU based binding that's preferred. So you might consider strengthening that one too. Because that, yeah.
So actually, this is not, route is actually not must support in. Oh, it's a code.
That's only a constraint, is it? No binding.
Sub elements for that. But the overall, that element is not a must support.
Oh, that's okay then.
Yeah, it's the codable concept IPS where that gets a little tricky.
Yeah, that's just cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. Take one back.
Yep. So again, with the differences, some of those were, most of these must supports are partly things we put on a core, but some of them come in from the IPS. Again, the biggest one from IPS is the subject reference being a mandatory element.
And keeping in mind that reference is an internal reference to the bundle. So I've come to the realization that's why they're doing that, is because you're expected to have a patient resource within the patient summary bundle.
Yeah.
Hence why it's mandatory.
So it's always a complete document with that patient.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had some stuff about in the timing, because that must support comes in from IPS, yeah.
Mhm.
And that's something we don't have in AU core. So I was wondering if there's any effect.
Well, there's no further constraints within timing. So as long as you've got a
Yeah,
timing,
that's good. Yeah, that's good.
Does the timing create any issues for anyone of having that
Is
element?
it? It's only if known anyway, so
Yeah.
probably okay.
Again,
Yeah.
these are things that we're highlighting to the group as if you're doing the AU patient summary on top of AU core, these are some additional constraints or requirements that are or must support elements that are being brought in effectively from patient summary.
it might be if known, but it's actually handle. That's the obligation on the consumer is
Yeah,
relatively strong.
yeah.
What does that actually mean when we get down to sub-elements? That's an interesting question for Friday.
And I think you'll probably address a lot of that, how we're doing the conformance for patient summary without the obligations and what that means. Natasha, you had a question of, is timing different than frequency?
So as a clinician, the frequency is that you need to take it twice a day, and the timing would be at 8 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock at night. So have we got that differentiation?
It's all covered. Yeah, sorry. Go.
It's all handled within the timing. But the problem is that there are so many options because frequency is just one way that you could articulate timing. And basically from an implementation perspective, we don't necessarily have any guidance to vendors on how they shall implement certain use cases. So it's a very common one, and I've been advocating that we go a little bit deeper for common scenarios like what you suggest. But at this stage, we haven't. But yes, that timing data type does support frequency, definitely.
Cool. Thank you.
So broadly with the timing, you can do frequency, you can do duration, you can do repeats. And as he said, they are looking at how to make that more specific.
Days of the week, times, and you can even go back to the good old QIDs and stuff like that if you want. So, but the problem is that there are many ways of representing it, the same thing.
Absolutely.
If there aren't any more questions on medication request, I'll switch over to medication statement. Some things to be aware of for medication statement. Again, we pick up that mandatory reference as we just talked about. We do pick up an effective mandatory from IPS. So that element now becomes a mandatory element, so it must be included, whereas an AU core effective is not a mandatory element. And then additionally, the typical must supports for some timing. And the other one I wanted to call out was, I think there's a code. Any thoughts from folks who have been working with this medication statement for patient summary? Has this effective element created any issues or any other thoughts?
Just the meaning of it. Sorry, just to repeat, it's been inherited from IPS. It's not mandatory in AU Core. Is it must support an AU Core?
AU Core does have a populative known obligation on it.
Yeah, now it's mandatory. So you would have to now put in a DAR if you didn't have a value.
Which I think some systems certainly would need to do because it's not always apparent in the data when that is affected for.
Well, as I said, the meaning really worries me of that element. It's like, I don't know how some systems would know that value.
Some certainly don't.
Agreed.
I wonder whether we should be pushing this back up to IPS, that this may be too strong.
I agree from a clinical point of view. I think in some circumstances, yes, if we're prescribing a PBS but if I'm just taking a medication history, I may not know the duration.
Yeah, it's the medication history scenario that this one supports. So that's the, obviously prescriptions and stuff like that. We use the other resource, but I guess if we're, Brett, when we're turning prescriptions into medication statements, where do we get this effective from?
See, if I was doing it, I would say if I'm on the same medication, so I'm not changing the drug or dosage and I'm prescribing multiple times, that start on the statement would be the first time I prescribed it. That's what I would do. And then that gives me a history of when that particular drug and dose was in use.
You're not always going to have linkage between prescriptions for drugs within systems. And even then, often you'll just have the date that something is entered into the system on the record. You won't necessarily have a start date or an end date. You might be able to infer it.
I know BP has a first script date.
Yeah. But that's when it's prescribed. That's not when the medication was taken.
Yeah, but that's the
I
best
think,
we can do, I
this
think, is what Brett's saying.
Yeah, I think that's an assertion that there's always an implication when you're doing a script anyway. You're not sure about the compliance after that. You're not sure if it's filled and you're not sure if it's actually taken.
But you may also not be prescribing it. You may just be noting it.
Yeah, for sure. History. Yeah, I think histories is a good point because you may not have that information for sure. So maybe something like optional with some obligations would make more sense.
Yeah,
I agree.
Is someone taking notes? Who's our minute taker? Can we get an action on this one to perhaps for me to take this back to IPS?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I think it's useful because if you were taking history, even just saying I started taking this in the year 2000 or something is a good.
Absolutely agree. It's
thing.
useful.
Yeah.
It's just
mandatory is
compliance of the person taking the history would be the hardest thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Cool.
Any other additional thoughts? Again, for all the medications and medication statements and requests, it is inheriting those slices for PBS and AMT. I think that's a much strongly preferred thing for Australia. Talking with Danielle previously, I think there's probably some reconciliation on how those actually get folded in from a technical publishing perspective, but overall, I don't think there's been any disagreement on those codings, correct?
Same as what we talked about previously, I think.
Okay. Go
What
ahead.
about the dosage there, Andrew? Can you just go? What's the right-hand side look for dosage?
You
It's
mean,
the same too. Yeah, so text and timing. So that's the same.
so that is inheriting the one that does get picked up is the timing. So for AU core,
Yep.
dosage and text are must support, or populate if known must support, while timing is what's inherited from IPS.
Yeah, I'd consider if just I know route is not one of the must supports, but I'd consider overriding that binding on route just because it's going to create, because the IPS binding for the dosage route is not good, let's say. So
Route of administration.
Yeah,
we would already inherit that, Brett.
Oh, from AU base. Yes,
Yeah.
true. Thank you. Yep. No, that makes sense. Don't need to do anything. Yeah.
But that
Yeah, because we're deriving from AU base, so we've already done that.
Yeah.
So the key elements, it should be bound to preferred.
Route of administration on the right there.
Yeah, cool. That's an NCTS. That's perfect. Thank you. I'm happy.
Okay.
Yeah, it
And
just changes the preference. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Cool.
Landon, I recognize, are we at time or do we have time to go through related person?
Let me just check how much time Shelley and Steve will need. They need 30 minutes. So if we do it very quickly in the next 5 minutes, we probably have time.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
I think we can introduce it. It's going to be probably we'll see. So related person is a profile that is not in IPS. It is a AU core profile only, and it is something that we have the opportunity to add to AU patient summary. With this, what it would mean is that in order to add it to the AU patient summary, we should be taking the AU core related person and kind of applying effectively the IPS requirements. So things that should or be must support or specific codal concepts. The specific one that does come in is the reference to the patient. As Brett explained earlier or Heath, sorry, makes you two guys up sometimes. As Heath and Brett explained earlier, that patient reference is referencing itself in the bundle in order to make that complete document. So if we were to add the AU patient summary, we would still do that patient as a one-to-one reference. So partly is there any thoughts on adding this related person to IPS? Is there any additional, sorry, to AUPS, is there any additional requirements that we should impose from IPS or for AUPS? And is there any proposals to actually add it itself?
I think it's a good idea because we've got it in AU core, so we might as well at least have a standardized one.
We actually added it to AU core for this purpose.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I think your point about the patient reference, yeah, I think we should do the same thing that the IPS style and actually make reference must support as well. Just because that is done elsewhere.
And probably the codable concept IPS thing, as much as we hate it.
Oh, yeah, that's probably true too, just to make it
Consistent.
consistent with the IPS style. That's a good one. So that would be, yeah, relationship.
So is there any other thoughts or on adding this or requirements that should be layered on?
Where
Okay.
were,
Mhm.
sorry, just one question for probably the floor. Where were we planning on surfacing, like what section within the AU patient summary were we planning on surfacing related person? Are we
It's
planning on
related.
creating a new section?
It's related to the author.
Yeah, okay. Okay, cool.
Actually, there's
Thanks,
a
Heath.
list there. There's a list there in the profile of where it's referenced. Yeah, so just in usage there.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, so authors and there's some other contexts as well.
Okay.
So given this, and would we want to then have someone potentially propose a motion to include related person into AUPS?
Landon, am I allowed to as the presenter, or
I believe
Yeah.
so. I think that's fine to do.
You're not the chair, so you can do it.
oh, great. I'm not the chair, so I can do all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
In that case, if there's no additional questions, I would like to propose a change or make a proposal that AUPS related person should have the IPS requirements folded in and be added to the patient summary. Is that
And referenced from those resources above.
yeah?
I'm wondering about the medication request. Can we jump into the medication request one? Because I'm assuming that this one is about self-prescribed drugs. Yep, the requester.
Yeah.
Now, this is probably a question for AE Core, but are we allowing that in Australia? But I'm opening up probably a wound, to be honest, for me anyway. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that that's how the related person is being used in that particular resource, is to say that a related person can be a requester of a drug. And we're talking about over-the-counter stuff, right? Things that are not prescribed by clinicians.
Yeah, I think that's part of like what do you use request for? Because it's if you're using request to record history and other reported.
So related person
stuff,
is
people.
a valid reference.
Parent, guardian, whatever. Yeah.
So I guess Heath, is that a?
Or it could be an employer, you know, all sorts of people. But I'm just having a look at this now. It looks like Danielle's already made the decision that we're going to reference it here. So is the motion even include the bit about referencing it? Is your motion more related to the things that we are adding into the profile, such as a mandatory subject reference and a codable concept, just to try and keep it simple, I guess?
Sounded like profile to me, which would be fine to get it in there.
Yeah, I think it would be to apply the standard IPS rules, such as the patient reference and codable concept, to the AU related person element that we inherited for core to make the AUPS related person. I guess that's what I would be proposing.
So pending any further questions Do we have someone that would like to second that motion?
I'll second it.
Awesome.
Heath.
All right, I will launch an ad hoc poll for this one. All right, the poll has been launched. Please provide your affirmative, negative, or abstain. Feel free to pop it in the chat if you don't have the ability to vote, or just say your vote out loud and your name. All right, we're at 80%. I will do a countdown now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'll end this poll. Share the results. We have +1 affirmative in the chat. So that is 8 affirmative, 0 negative, and 9 abstain. So that motion has passed. Thanks, everyone. Back to you, Andrew.
Okay. I think that pretty much wraps up the 4 profiles we wanted to cover today. The only takeaways I had, I think, are both for Heath. One, Heath, you're going to take the on medication statement, the effective mandatory element to IPS. And then whether or not the binding on item for medication should be strengthened at a AU core level.
Yeah. And I think that aligns with route as well. The same question, really. It's sort of a fundamental. Yep. Cool.
Okay. Great. Thank you all. And with that, I will pass it back to Landon.
Great, thank you very much. So for use case decisions, is it okay if I hand over to, is it you, Shelley?
Yeah, I can take over the share if that's okay.
Amazing, thank you.
Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep, lovely. Okay, so I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible so we don't hold everyone up. So yeah, basically we're just going to continue refining and aligning on the remaining questions that we have for our use case design decisions. So just going to start off with a very, very quick recap of our focus use cases for the IG. And also just a reminder again, they're just example use cases. We're not giving you mandates for implementation. We just want to illustrate key concepts and workflows. So as a group, we agreed to focus on the 2 specific use case steps of step 5 from the interstate GP visit for the consumer journey and step 4 from the referral to specialist and allied health consumer journey. So again, at the last meeting, we'll zoom in on step 5, the interstate GP visit. We formally passed a motion that in this use case, we're going to be demonstrating a patient summary that's specifically authored by the patient's usual GP, that it's professionally attested and that it's curated from pre-populated system data and that it's going to be retrieved by a link. So this is just going to help us illustrate how shared clinical information can flow securely and meaningfully between providers without prescribing how attestation must be defined or implemented. So we had a really good discussion around this and the motion was passed with strong support. We got halfway through looking at step 4, the referral to specialist and allied health. So we agreed that there was 2 patient summaries in this step. We have the static summary that's created at the time of the referral, and then we have the dynamic summary, which is the most recent patient summary. So we passed a motion to demonstrate that for our static patient summary, it's going to be professionally attested. And importantly, it's not going to be labelled as legally attested. So we don't want to have any implementation and jurisdictional ambiguity. It's going to be created by the provider at the time of referral. And the group agreed that this reflects current common clinical practice, where a summary is attached to a referral and effectively signed off by the provider at that moment. We had a robust discussion about how attestation should be interpreted with the consensus that we're going to keep it simple without implying any legal obligations. So that was where we got up to, but we still had some design decisions that need further input from the group, which I'm going to revisit today. So following on from the motion to demonstrate a static patient summary, what we also wanted to ask to the group was, how's this static patient summary going to be transmitted as part of the referral to the specialist or allied health? Should this be a bundled document that's embedded directly in the referral? Should it be a reference link to an external service or repository? Should it be both? Or should it be something else completely entirely? And we thought, what would be most useful for you to see to support your development, testing, or integration work? So I just want to open it to the floor and just see if anyone had any thoughts or comments or questions around that, or any ideas. Or does anyone not care?
Question I've got is, how does it actually affect your examples?
I guess it will be what most people would like to see is what we'll put in the example.
As a clinician, I would prefer it to be embedded in the referral.
Yep.
Only because I don't want to click on anything else to go see something. So the least amount of clicks, the better.
Makes sense. Do you have any implementers on the line now that are currently looking at doing this and that have an existing way of that they're planning to do this, or would like to see this demonstrated?
Well, I think the other one that people are looking at is a link.
Mm. All right, so if we have no further thoughts on that, I might leave that here for now. Steve's going to do a bit of a deep dive into links and things like that, so we might pick it back up in that conversation and be able to come out with some more ideas from that. So I'll move on. So when we're talking about the second patient summary in this step, so this is the one that we're calling the most recent patient summary. What we want to do is make sure that we're aligned on the purpose and implementation. So here's what we thought the intent of this step was. So we were proposing that this is a device authored and digitally signed summary that shows integrity in transit and that's not attested. So this one's different to the static patient summary in that it doesn't have clinical endorsement. And so we'd like to confirm that interpretation with the group. Does anyone have any objections to what we're proposing for the most recent patient summary? Any thoughts, any concerns, any comments? Are you happy with that?
Benji, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a question on digitally signed. Again, I'm assuming this is dependent on the vendor, how they want to implement this.
Yeah, so we're just going to give you this is just for an example in the use case in the IG. We're not saying you have to do this.
Okay, just a proposal. Okay.
Yeah.
Was the other one digitally signed as well? The static one?
Yes. I'm going to be doing a session on that maybe next meeting, just about some of the options that we have for signing, which just improves that data integrity and goes along with the attestation.
Yeah, I think from a clinical point of view, at the time that I'm referring, I need to say that this is static because it's what I know at this time that I'm sending that referral. The time that the actual specialist sees the patients could be months after I've sent my referral. So having that link to the most recent updates, which I may have changed that patient's insulin 6 times since I sent the referral to you. So as the GP sending it to an endocrinologist. So I think it's being able to access the most recent information, whether or not the patients actually then updated that themselves as well, I'm assuming. Yeah, that would be the workflow from my perspective.
But if this
Thanks,
is
Natasha.
dynamically being generated, is it just the system that you're looking at doing the signing here, Steve?
Yes.
Yeah, the system would sign it and just say this has come from, XYZ practice. And so that then It can also be verified on the other end that it hasn't been tampered with in transit.
Okay, so if there's no additional questions or concerns, what I might do is move a motion to accept that for the most recent patient summary, we'll be demonstrating a patient summary that's device authored, digitally signed, and that shows integrity in transit and is not attested. And if I could trouble you, Landon, to pop up another poll.
Sure. Do we have any?
And if someone would second.
Yes. Would someone like to second that
Happy to
motion?
second.
Great, thank you. I will launch a poll. Oh, and the existing one, sorry, just 1 second. Okay, so please feel free to enter your votes and pop it in the chat if you're unable to vote. Okay, we're at 82%, so that's 88%. I'll just do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll now. So Brett has 1 affirmative in the chat, so that is 11 affirmative, 0 negative, 5 abstain. That motion has passed. And I'll share the results, sorry.
Lovely, thanks everyone. So I have one more question for you all today. And basically, we also just need some further feedback from the group on another open question. So now that we've determined that we are going to get this from a system, what's that external system going to be that provides the most recent summary? Where's it coming from? You know, are we looking at a different clinical information system? Are we looking at a health information exchange? Or even are we looking at My Health Record or something else? So we're just hoping to get a sense of what implementers would like to see demonstrated here, just so that we can make those examples a bit more meaningful and reflective of real-world workflows.
Sanjeev, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, and I know it's already in the slide, but really need to understand what the agency's vision is with regards to MyHR.
Yeah, I don't think we've got any agency people on the call today.
I don't think we're going to get that, Sanjeev, at this point in time. It's I think the question's open enough. What would we like to see?
Yeah.
That's what I
Probably
would like
more
to see.
questions for the clinicians than perhaps us technicians, but yeah. I mean, I'll put my 2 cents worth in. I think if a referrals come from a GP, the latest sort of the point in time or the static patient summary was there. I would probably want to have the most recent one somewhat comparable to the previous one from that GP system. If I'm getting it from somewhere else, it could have information that is missing, it could have additional information, and it would be rather difficult, I would have thought, and I'm really interested in Natasha's view on this, to be able to compare apples and apples. But I also acknowledge the fact that there's potential benefit in having other information that might have come from other places. But yeah, that's my 2 cents from a techie perspective.
So I'm from SA Health. So we have a My Health Record tab embedded within our EMR. So from a clinical perspective, the more that I don't have to go outside of my current system to access something else, you know, so I would want to have the same information in one location rather than having to access multiple systems. So My Health Record would be where I would want to go to view information.
Thanks, Natasha.
Brett, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just kind of going to agree with Heath, really. I think the referring system where you got the original summaries from makes sense. In the absence of having somewhere else to stash it, I think things like My Health Record, if we move to share by default and can get some guarantees there'll be data there, then that becomes a bit more of a passive way to have it, or maybe even will depend on it. But I think that there's a lot of information flow questions in terms of, can we guarantee that summaries are going to be pushed to My Health Record as part of referrals and things like that? Because I think it's otherwise, I think we need all of these things. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on how much information I have in the referral, to be honest, because as a clinician reviewing the patient, I need to have the most up-to-date blood results, these most up-to-date x-rays, you know, imaging, as well as the most up-to-date medication history. So if all of that information is contained within and can be accessed via the referral, that would be fantastic. But they just really want a one-stop shop. They don't want to have to. Their issue at the moment is they have to go looking in so many different disparate systems to find a complete patient picture. However, we can make it quick and easy to access for them, would be to their benefit. So
yeah, and I think too, this is a lot of implementation questions, because I mean, if we know that these pathways exist, the receiving system can prepare the summary for you to see, right? Because it knows where to get it, things like that. So I think some of it would be kind of better managed by the referring system saying where the information is. So then the receiving system can access it. And if we have a standardized access methodology, then that lets the receiving system get it, you know, basically as needed or on demand. So whether it's in My Health Record or in a clinical system, if the interfacing is and the access is the same, you can kind of build a system that gives you what you want.
And as you said, you've already got the tab for the My Health Record. You're already getting effectively a patient summary from the My Health Record through your existing mechanisms. What you don't have is the ability to go and get the latest health summary from the GP. And having this mechanism would, if you chose to go to be able to do that and be able to compare it against what was the patient summary at the time of the referral, what's changed?
Exactly, because that's the biggest question. What has changed from the time the referral came in? Because that could be 12 months since that referral actually landed in my referral system.
So from your perspective, Shelley, my thoughts was, well, to some extent, it doesn't matter, I think. But I think to be able to do something, it would probably be good to get it from the CIS where the referral came from as a starting point. But in principle, there's really not a lot of difference between the two, technically.
Thanks, Heath. If no one else has any further comments, I'll hand over to, yep.
There are hands up.
There are hands up, sorry. Yep, no troubles.
We'll go to Andrew.
Sorry, I can't see the hands.
That's okay. We'll go to Andrew. You have your hand up.
Yep. I did want to just agree with Heath that I do think for now the CIS is the most reasonable one, because that's saying, you know what, go back to the system that gave you the referral, get the most recent health summary that they have. If there are other health summaries available out in the ecosystem, such as My Health Record, the referral recipient is able to do that, more than welcome to do that. But by just saying, you know what, the expectation is that it's from the CIS right now, we're not then, you know, ascribing or requiring or hoping that, you know, My Health Record has the upload by default, or that the inherently ascribing that the referring system should also therefore be uploading on a regular basis the most recent summary. And we just kind of remove that and we focus more on the pathway between the referring CIS and the receiving CIS.
Thanks, Andrew. And last comments with Brett.
Yeah, I was just going to add a lot. I think, like, in reality, I think the CIS makes the most sense right now. But I think in some ways, like, systems can be built up. Like, if my system always publishes summaries that are current to the My Health Record by default, I might want to nominate that the information is in My Health Record or in a third-party repository, you know, for access, or via direct access via HIE. And so therefore, like, you can just nominate where the information can be retrieved from. So it need not be any particular system, as long as it's standardized and has all of the capability of getting the current summary. So I kind of think the answer is all of these things, and it depends on the system where you'll put build this stuff. I imagine there's a bunch of CISs that won't build direct interfacing, right? They'll want to publish it somewhere that is available. So that takes a lot of load off the system implementers, because you don't need to implement interfaces and endpoints. So it's yeah, I think all the options are on the table, but I think CIS is the first one.
Great, thanks. So back to yourself, Shelley or Steve.
Yeah, so with that, I'm going to hand over to Steve now that we've taken up all the time and given him hardly any time, but he's going to walk us through link generation and methods of accessing the patient summary. So I will go to the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. So I am going to run out of time, but I'm going to introduce this concept because I've done up a page on Confluence around some of the different options. And it goes into a fair bit of depth about how the workflow would work, and the different security issues that arise, and which ones are more secure than others, which ones might fit the use cases better. So I'll introduce the concept, I'll rip through some slides, and then what I'll do is I'll ask everyone to go to the Confluence page and have a read, ready for the next session. This is if you're interested in the security side of things for the sharing patient summaries. So essentially, yeah, we're talking about securely sharing these patient summaries, and one of the key things that needed to happen for this investigation was around keeping authorization, privacy, confidentiality, security, and auditing front of mind. The reason I've called these out specifically is because in the workshop on the 20th of February, this is what people said. So on the tables on the right, we had some mentees, and we asked a few questions. So we said, what do you need agreement on before you can implement retrieval and also providing patient summaries, in terms of the referral-based patient summary, but also the most recent patient summary. And so the top features there were around authentication, authorization, security, access, identity, those options. So in some of the features that I'm about to, or sorry, the options that I'm about to present to you, you'll see these features coming through, some more strongly than others. So that may guide your decision as to which option we might want to go with. So yeah, I guess if you keep that robust security and authorization in mind, if that's important to you, keep that in mind as we go through the options. One thing that I will call out though is that we're not talking about FHIR operations at this point. So we're not talking about $summary, docref, any of the others. All of these operations, those $summary, docref, they can be layered on top of whatever access mechanism we choose. So we're kind of looking at the underlying security mechanism for exchange here. We're not talking about the FHIR operations. So if we go to the next slide, please, Shelley. So setting a bit of context and constraints around what we're looking at. So initially, I've assumed that there's no central authentication server. This would probably be something like My Health Record if we did it, or MyGov or something like that we would use. But we're not in the first few options. I'm assuming that there is none of this. So you receive a link, you can access the link. You don't need to log in. You might still need to prove your identity, but not via a traditional interactive login. So you might need to provide a certificate or some sort of challenge to prove who you are. So that sort of highlights the classic split between authentication and authorization. So authentication is really proving who you are, your identity, whereas authorization determines whether or not you can access something. So authentication in the first few sections is out of scope of these options, but authorization remains fully in scope. The next context or constraint here is that we have a potentially unknown recipient. So whilst a referral is sent to a specialist and the GP might be looking through their list and choosing their name, it may actually be triaged by someone else at that practice. Or it could go to a department at a public hospital, so the Department of Enterology, Gastroenterology rather. We don't actually have a specific person it is necessarily going to. So that's in the referral case. In the case of the interstate GP visit, which is the other use case that we're looking at, that could be any GP that's needing to access that patient summary. Also, in an emergency care situation, it could also be anyone that's needing to access the patient summary. So we're kind of framing this that we have a potentially unknown recipient. And that is important because we don't have that authentication server, so we can't get them to log in to prove who they are. We're also going to assume that some of these channels are reasonably insecure. So email, SMS, fax, even printed QR codes, they're all uncontrolled mediums. So you send it off, you actually don't know where it's going to end up or who's going to see it. Especially if they're printed, someone could snap a picture of it and then have access to that QR code. So we've discussed preserving confidentiality, integrity, and access control. So confidentiality being that we only want the intended viewer to receive it. We've mentioned digital signatures in the previous portion of this meeting, and the access control and auditing features. Those came through as some of the more important features that we need to consider. So this essentially means that we've got a bit of a trade-off in terms of that security. So do we have a one-time link or a multi-use link or an expiring link? And all of this really needs to be considered in that essentially what I'm calling an identity offline scenario where we don't have that central authentication server. So I've come up with some options. There may be more. I don't think I'm going to have time to go in depth of these, so I'm just going to rip over them and then get you to look at the link that I've provided to the Confluence page, and then we can come back next time and I can go through them in more depth. So the first one is public key cryptography. So this, I'll just give the high level of each, and then we'll move on to the next one. So this is where the GP who's creating the patient summary would encrypt that patient summary with the public key of the recipient. So you know where it's going. Potentially it's some clinic or practice. And then when they receive that, only the recipient's private key can decrypt it. So this gives us, it's really strong confidentiality. And the great thing about this method is it works for both links and embedded content. So if we're embedding that referral in the if we're embedding the patient summary in the referral, that could be a file that could be decrypted on the other end automatically by the system that's receiving it, or the link would work in much the same way. There's a bunch of pros and cons. I do not have time to go into those, but I will next time. So the second option here is, Shelley, if you can just go to the next slide. Second option is smart health links. So this is where the GP encrypts the patient summary, this time with a random key, and then provides that key plus the URL to access the patient summary in the link. The recipient then clicks the link and then decrypts it using the embedded key. This is quite good when you have the patient being in charge of essentially providing that consent and that link. It works less good when it's just being sent around because of the design of smart health links, you can essentially decode it and grab the key out yourself. So if the link was to get into the wrong hands, anyone with the link can open it. It also doesn't work necessarily if we want to embed the referral within the if we want to embed the patient summary within the referral as a file, because it's all designed around links and accessing the file from some sort of remote server. So definitely an option that we can explore when we're looking at links, and we can dive into that in a little bit more detail next time. The third option is around the one-time or expiring links that I mentioned earlier. So this is very similar to if you need to reset your password from some sort of system, you get a one-time link with a token on the end. As soon as you click that link, you can no longer use that link again. You can also make them so that they expire after a certain period of time, so you can click it a couple of times. I guess the main issue with this one is that if you do click it and then want to access it again and it's expired, you've got a problem. So that could lead to a delay in care. There's options around that, but the main issue there would be the workflow issue, I think. So there are three options that I've thought about for offline access. If we do have a central identity provider or authentication server, so such as My Health Record or some system that's managing authentication, so a user's logging in or providing some sort of identity, we get a bunch more options available. The link no longer needs to contain any of that sensitive data because it is now essentially pointing to a record on some server. It doesn't need to encode any of that data within the link itself. So the identity provider then manages that authentication and authorization and does all the token management for you. And there's a couple of options here which work really well when we've got that authentication server. And the first one is the Smart on FHIR. You might have heard of that. This is essentially OAuth 2. So that's where the identity provider authenticates the clinician that's requesting the record, gives them a token. They then use that token to make a further request to the place that actually has the content and gets the token back. And the fifth one is using My Health Record. So that workflow is already defined in terms of the record, the authentication server being My Health Record. Doesn't necessarily need to hold the patient summary itself, but it can be that authentication broker. Landon, I think you're going to tell me I'm out of time.
Yes, out of time. We've
Okay.
actually hit our time. I
Yep.
don't have time to go through the what's next slides, but just for everyone's information, next time we'll be covering allergy intolerance, organization, practitioner role. There's an optional conformance session on the 23rd of May, if you want to get across that, which would be great. And bring along any questions you have around those profiles. And
Yep.
feel free to post stuff in Zulip and check out Steve's link that he's provided there.
Yeah, I'll send that out in Zulip as well. Yep.
Perfect, but we're at time. So awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.
Can I also just put a call out for next week's patient summary conformance session next Friday as well?
Yes. Perfect.
Nice.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Right.